The London air thrummed with that unique energy you only find in a city steeped in history. Outside Buckingham Palace, the usual throng of tourists had gathered, a kaleidoscope of faces from every corner of the globe, all drawn to witness the iconic changing of the guard. Smiles flashed, cameras clicked incessantly, and a sense of excited anticipation hung in the air, thick and sweet like summer honey. It was a joyous occasion, a quintessential London moment. Amidst this cheerful tableau, one figure stood out, not for celebration, but for a jarring discordance. He was like a misplaced note in a beautiful melody, a shadow cast on bright sunshine. Liam Walker, I later learned his name, a man who exuded a crude, almost performative masculinity. He was a large man, undeniably, built like a brick outhouse, all broad shoulders and thick-necked. His posture screamed of hours spent pumping iron, but his eyes held a different kind of weight, a need for attention, a hunger to dominate the space around him. His black t-shirt, emblazoned with some aggressive slogan I couldn't quite make out, clashed with the elegant backdrop of the palace. Faded jeans and scuffed boots completed the picture, a walking advertisement for rebellion in the most inappropriate setting imaginable. He moved with a deliberate heaviness, each step seeming designed to draw eyes. It worked. People glanced, then stared, drawn to the sheer force of his presence. He positioned himself right at the barriers, arms folded across his chest, his gaze raking over the royal guards with undisguised contempt. A group of friends, or perhaps they were just unfortunate acquaintances, huddled around him, their faces etched with a mixture of nervousness and reluctant amusement as Liam's voice, already loud, began to escalate. "Look at these blokes," he bellowed, his voice carrying easily over the murmur of the crowd. "They're just mannequins, I tell you. Nothing but dressed-up dolls." He leaned into his companions, his words laced with scorn. "Don't even blink, do they? What is this? Some kind of robot show?" His friends offered weak, placating chuckles, half-hearted attempts to quieten him. But their feeble efforts only seemed to inflate his ego further. He thrived on their attention and on the growing awareness of the crowd around us. Sensing the shift in focus, the collective gaze now drawn to his spectacle, he edged closer to the barrier. He jabbed a thick finger towards one of the guards, singling him out with the casual cruelty of a schoolyard bully. This particular guard was a young man, barely more than a lad really, named Henry Blake. He wasn't unusually tall, just of average height, but there was a sharpness to his features, an angularity to his face framed by short, chestnut hair peeking out from beneath the iconic bearskin hat. His scarlet tunic, immaculate and gleaming in the London sun, was a testament to his unwavering professionalism. He stood ramrod straight, unmoving, a picture of British discipline. His gaze was fixed resolutely forward, seemingly oblivious to the growing commotion around him. But I saw it, a slight tightening around his jaw, a barely perceptible clench of his fist, signs that the barrage of insults was not going unnoticed. "Boy, you in the red!" Liam roared, his voice slicing through the general chatter. "Show us what you've got, or are you just here for the photos, mate?" A hush fell over the crowd. Phones, which had been clicking merrily just moments before, were now held aloft, recording, poised to capture what felt like an impending explosion. Murmurs rippled through the gathering, disapproval, curiosity, a morbid fascination with the unfolding drama. Henry remained steadfast, a statue carved from resolve. His face was an impassive mask betraying nothing, but the air around him crackled with an almost tangible tension. The crowd began to subtly divide, some openly condemning Liam's boorish antics, others, shamefully, I admit, I might have been among them for a fleeting moment, watching with a kind of morbid curiosity, wondering just how far this would go. "Hey, buddy, can't you hear me?" Liam taunted, his voice dripping with mockery. Or is it some kind of order to stay frozen, even if someone slaps you in the face? A young woman beside me, dressed in a light summer dress, whispered to her companion, "Why is he doing this? It's so disrespectful." Liam's voice boomed across the square, each word escalating the tension, each syllable more provocative than the last. But instead of shrinking back, as any decent person would have, Liam seemed to revel in the outrage he was provoking. His smirk widened, a grotesque caricature of confidence. "All right, people, listen up," he yelled, turning to address the crowd as if we were all extras in his personal theater of the absurd. "I'll bet you 10 quid he won't even blink." His friends, those unfortunate souls, exchanged increasingly worried glances, their nervous smiles now faltering, replaced by a dawning realization of just how badly this could go. Henry, still a pillar of discipline amidst the swirling chaos, stood firm. Inside, I imagine, a storm of emotions might have been brewing, but outwardly, he remained the epitome of composure. I sensed, as did many others I suspect, that this morning, which had begun with such cheerful promise, was heading towards a decidedly unpleasant conclusion. The crowd held its collective breath, a silent, expectant mass, as Liam took another step closer to the barrier. The atmosphere grew heavy, oppressive, as if all of London itself was holding its breath, waiting, dreading what would happen next. Liam moved forward like some kind of gladiator entering an arena, his broad shoulders taut with a disturbing energy. He swung his arms in exaggerated, theatrical motions, mimicking a pre-fight warm-up. The loud cracking of his neck, deliberately amplified, echoed in the sudden hush. His cocky grin, plastered across his face, screamed defiance, a challenge thrown down not just to the guard, but to the very fabric of respect and tradition. "Liam, what are you doing?" One of his friends, the bespectacled one, nervously grabbed his arm, a desperate, last-ditch attempt to intervene. "This isn't a game, mate. Leave him alone. It's just their job." Liam brushed him off with a dismissive laugh, a harsh, grating sound that grated on my nerves. His eyes gleamed with a disturbing mischief. "A job," he sneered, nodding towards Henry with open contempt. "This is a circus. He can't even look me in the eye. A real soldier wouldn't act like this." A wave of disapproval washed through the crowd. Murmurs, louder and more pointed now, rose from different corners. "Enough. Stop embarrassing yourself," someone shouted. "Show some respect for their traditions. Someone needs to remove him. This is completely out of line." But Liam seemed to feed off the outrage, to draw energy from the negative attention. He took another step forward, crossing a line, a subtle but significant shift from mere provocation to outright disrespect. With a deliberate, almost theatrical motion, he stepped over the barrier, breaching the invisible boundary of decorum and common sense. He stood there, inside the roped-off area, face to face with Henry, who, incredibly, remained resolutely still. Liam loomed over Henry, his bulk casting a literal shadow over the younger man. His broad chest nearly brushed against the guard's pristine tunic, an act of blatant intimidation. Raising his arms mockingly, he waved his hands in front of Henry's face, as if testing the limits of his restraint, like a child tormenting an animal. "Come on, give me something, anything," Liam goaded, his voice now laced with a menacing edge. "You're not even going to blink, huh?" His provocations escalated, becoming more aggressive, more overtly disrespectful. He threw mock punches at the air near Henry's face, making exaggerated whoosh noises, punctuating his taunts with childish sound effects. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath. Some people, braver than I, inched forward, as if considering intervening physically. Others, like me, stood frozen, caught between horror and a morbid fascination. Henry, a monument of self-control, remained stoic. But I could see it now, the subtle signs of strain. Every muscle in his body was visibly tightened, coiled, preparing for the worst. His training, his ingrained discipline, demanded unwavering restraint. But I could sense, could almost feel, the internal struggle, the bracing himself for the inevitable crossing of the line. "You're just a toy," Liam yelled, leaning so close to Henry that their faces were mere inches apart. His voice, now a guttural snarl, carried a palpable edge of menace. Let me show these people how easy it is to break a toy. The crowd erupted. Cries of protest, shouts of alarm filled the air. Someone yelled, "Stop this now. This is insane. Call the police." Even Liam's friends, now visibly frantic, tried to pull him back. Their earlier amusement completely evaporated. "Liam, you don't know what you're doing," one of them shrieked, his voice thin with panic. Liam shrugged them off with effortless ease. His eyes locked on Henry, his towering frame and brazen attitude casting a dark, ominous shadow over the scene. Henry, unwavering, stood his ground, his calm demeanor in its very stillness, silently challenging Liam's crude bravado. The tension was almost unbearable, palpable, thick enough to choke on. Every eye was on the wrestler, on Liam, as he raised his hand higher, preparing to strike, to shatter the fragile peace. The crowd held its breath, their horror reaching a fever pitch. Then Liam laughed, a sharp, mocking sound, devoid of humor, that cut through the horrified silence like a shard of glass. "If you won't act, I'll give you some help," he sneered, raising his arm in a theatrical flourish. The crowd gasped again, a collective sound of dread. Phones continued to record every agonizing moment. Cries of alarm echoed around the square. "He's crossed the line!" someone screamed. "Somebody stop him!" But Liam ignored them all, deaf to reason, blind to the consequences. Stepping even closer to the guard, he moved with a chilling precision, like a predator closing in on its prey. His face, contorted with a cold determination, his movements carried the practiced efficiency of a professional fighter, someone intimately familiar with physical confrontation. Despite the clear and present danger, Henry remained in place, locked in his rigid stance, his face inscrutable, but his eyes, just for a fleeting moment, betrayed a flicker of unease, a human crack in the facade of unwavering duty. "You brought this on yourself, Red," Liam taunted, raising his hands as if squaring off in a boxing ring. Before anyone could react, before anyone could intervene, Liam lunged. His massive arms wrapped around Henry's torso, engulfing him, gripping him with brutal force. It all happened in mere seconds, yet to the horrified onlookers, time seemed to slow to a crawl, each fraction of a second stretching into an eternity. A collective gasp erupted from the crowd, a wave of horrified realization washing over us as we understood, with sickening clarity, what was about to unfold. "Stop! Are you out of your mind?" A woman near the barrier screamed, her voice lost in the rising tide of panic, but Liam wasn't listening. With a loud, guttural grunt, he flexed his colossal muscles and lifted Henry off the ground as if he weighed no more than a feather. Despite the powerful hold, despite the sheer shock of the assault, Henry attempted to break free, a futile struggle against overwhelming force. But Liam was too strong, too practiced. He spun his body with practiced precision, the kind honed in countless wrestling matches, setting Henry up for a textbook throw. And then it happened, the sickening thud, the resounding crash, the sound of impact that echoed across the square, silencing the panicked cries of the crowd. Henry was slammed onto the hard cobblestones. His bearskin hat, the symbol of his office, tumbled off his head, rolling forlornly across the pavement. He just slammed the guard. A man near me exclaimed, his voice trembling, holding his phone aloft to capture the horrific aftermath. Henry hit the ground hard, landing with sickening force on his back. His pristine red uniform was instantly dirted, crumpled, defiled. Pain contorted his face, a raw, visceral expression of agony as he attempted to sit up, his good hand scrabbling at the ground for purchase. But a sharp jolt, a searing lance of pain, stopped him. His left arm hung limp, useless, at an unnatural angle, a stark, undeniable sign of serious injury. The crowd erupted into chaos. Shouts of panic, gasps of horror filled the air. Some people screamed, others sobbed. Phones continued to record, capturing the grotesque spectacle for posterity. A few, finally spurred into action, desperately tried to call for help. "Someone call the police," a voice yelled. "This is an attack. He's broken his arm. Stop him now." Liam stepped back, his chest heaving, as if from some great exertion. But his face was a mask of smug triumph. A grotesque grin stretched across his features as he raised his arms triumphantly, celebrating unbelievably, as though he had just won some sort of twisted, barbaric wrestling match. "That's how it's done," he boomed, addressing the horrified crowd, his voice dripping with arrogance. "This is what happens when you face a real fighter." His moment of twisted triumph was short-lived. Officers from the Royal Guard, seemingly materializing from nowhere, converged around the fallen Henry with swift, decisive efficiency. One of them, a tall man with sharp, commanding features, took immediate charge. He crouched beside the injured guard, his voice sharp and authoritative as he issued commands to his colleagues. "Secure the area. Call for medical assistance. Detain that man." Liam, his triumphant grin faltering, began to protest, some garbled, nonsensical excuse forming on his lips. But the officer, his face set with grim determination, was already striding towards him, cutting off his pathetic attempt at justification. Despite his obvious pain, Henry managed to straighten himself slightly, his face still etched with agony, but his posture regaining a semblance of dignity. Inside, I could only imagine the surge of anger, of righteous indignation he must have been feeling. Even in this moment of profound pain, he maintained the unwavering dignity of his role, a testament to his character, to the very essence of what it meant to be a Royal Guard. The Royal Guard officers moved with precision, a well-drilled machine responding to a crisis. The crowd instinctively parted, forming a wide circle around Liam, trapping him in the center of their collective outrage. At the forefront stood the lead officer, his steely gaze fixed on the wrestler, his sharp black uniform, a stark contrast to the scarlet of the injured guard, and his commanding voice left no room for argument, no space for negotiation. "You are under arrest," he stated, each word clipped and precise, "for assaulting a member of the Royal Guard and disturbing the peace. Get on the ground now." Liam, still seemingly unable to grasp the gravity of the situation, took a step back, his hands raised in a gesture of bewildered defiance. His expression was a bizarre mix of defiance and genuine confusion. "Come on, it was just a slam. I was just showing him a few moves," he argued, glancing around at the crowd as if searching for allies, for some sign of support for his ludicrous defense. But the crowd was far from supportive. A wave of outrage, a chorus of condemnation, erupted from all sides. "Serves you right," someone yelled. "That's unacceptable. Respect the guards. You've crossed the line, mate." A long time ago, Liam tried to speak again, to stammer out some further pathetic excuse, but the officers were no longer interested in listening. One of them moved swiftly forward, seizing Liam's arms and twisting them sharply behind his back. The metallic click of handcuffs, a stark, final sound, echoed in the tense air. The crowd roared in approval, a wave of collective satisfaction washing over the square. Some even clapped, a spontaneous burst of applause for the swift, decisive action. "Get down!" Another officer barked, his tone cold and utterly commanding. Realizing, finally, that resistance was not only futile but would only worsen his already dire situation, Liam reluctantly complied, lowering his hulking frame to the cobblestones. His face twisted with frustration, with a dawning comprehension of the enormity of his folly, as he muttered, almost inaudibly, "It was just a joke." The applause grew louder, more sustained. Spectators, emboldened by the arrest, shouted their own condemnations. "This isn't a wrestling ring, you idiot. You got what you deserved. Shame on you. The Royal Guard doesn't tolerate this." Meanwhile, medics, alerted with remarkable speed, rushed to Henry's side. The young guard, still seated on the cobblestones, his face pale and drawn, his breathing labored, clenched his teeth against the waves of pain. His left arm dangled uselessly, a stark testament to Liam's brutality. One of the medics, a woman with cropped brown hair and gloved hands, quickly examined his shoulder, her expression grim. "You have a likely fracture," she stated, her voice calm and professional despite the chaos surrounding them. "We'll stabilize it here, but you'll need hospital treatment." She nodded to her colleagues, and they began to work with practiced efficiency. Henry, ever the stoic professional, tried to protest, his voice remarkably steady despite the obvious pain. "I can stand," he insisted, his words slightly slurred but clear in their intent. "I need to return to my post." But the medics were firm, gently but decisively overruling his protest. Carefully, they helped him to his feet and onto a waiting stretcher. Despite his obvious pain, despite the humiliation of being assaulted in front of hundreds of people, Henry kept his head held high, his gaze fixed forward, maintaining his dignity even in this moment of vulnerability. The crowd, witnessing his resilience, his unwavering professionalism, began to cheer again, a spontaneous outpouring of admiration and support. "He's a true professional," someone shouted. "What composure, even after all that." As Liam lay on the pavement, still handcuffed, still muttering his pathetic justifications, the officers hauled him to his feet, ready to transport him to the waiting police vehicle. His face, a mask of anger and confusion, no longer commanded the attention of the crowd. The focus had shifted, rightfully, to the injured guard, to Henry Blake, the embodiment of British resilience and quiet strength. "Get him out of here," the lead officer ordered, casting one last stern look at Liam, a look that conveyed the full weight of his contempt. The ambulance pulled away, its sirens briefly piercing the air before fading into the London traffic, carrying Henry to the hospital, and with it went the immediate, suffocating tension of the morning. Left behind was a murmur of the crowd, a buzz of shocked conversation, the relentless clicks of cameras still capturing every detail of the scene, and a collective sense that this shocking incident, this gross display of disrespect, would be remembered for a long time to come.